Hello and welcome to Prairie Pulse. Coming up later in the show, we'll profile Belcourt, North Dakota author Denise Lajmeder. But first, joining me now is author of Dakota Attitude, Interviews from Every Town in North Dakota, Jim Puppy. Jim, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, John.
As we get started, tell the folks a little bit about yourself, maybe your background, where you're from.
Well, I was raised in Pembina County, 6 miles from Hensel. My dad was a diversified farmer. I had 3 brothers and went to country school. There were only 2 in my first grade class. And I enjoyed my childhood with my brothers and my parents and interacting with the neighbors and my relatives in the area where we got together very, very frequently. Graduated from Cavalier High School and North Dakota State School of Forestry in Bottineau. From there I went to the University of North Dakota. And I was drafted into the Army, spent 2 years on active duty, 1 year in Vietnam. I came back and I worked for the Veterans Administration. I rated disability. And I also was the former prisoner of war coordinator. And that was very personable to me. I enjoyed it, and it was kind of life-changing to me because I learned that those who have gone through the most in life complain the least. And that was kind of an impetus for me to search out people in our state who didn't have the notoriety and wanted to find out what made them tick. Because someone once said that, you know, we know more about the people, or excuse me, we know more about the soil of North Dakota than what we know about the people. So that was the reason why I wanted to get out there and find out what was on people's minds and what we could learn from them.
Well, how did this book even originate? And as a North Dakota native, what made you want to travel to every town in North Dakota?
Well, I knew I loved the state and I loved the people, and I found that people were open to visiting and to tell me their story. So I was out there, and I felt that people would share with me once I told them I was a native of North Dakota and I wasn't from out of state, and I was doing a project or a book relative to someone from every town. And what I really did when I went into these towns, I explained to people that I was looking for somebody with good human character, somebody with integrity, someone who they trusted and were respected. And so that's how I was referred to these people, and it just seemed to click, and it took off. I recorded all the sessions, I photographed them, and had them all sign a release of information so that it'd be covered. But the trip and experience was very endearing to me.
Yeah. With that said, how many towns did you go to, and how many people did you interview?
On the North Dakota state map, that was my basis, and I would take pockets of North Dakota at a time. I would leave Fargo with my van and my car, and I would complete an area so that I wouldn't have to go back to that area again. But sometimes some of these towns really didn't have any occupants at all. In fact, the North Dakota map lists towns in North Dakota that don't have any occupants at all, and most of the towns in the state, I believe, are unincorporated. So we're dealing with some pretty small populations. I think there's about 400 on the map. I'm not sure of the number, but in the book, I interviewed 617 people from our state.
617. Mm-hmm. You talked about who you decided to interview and how you approached it, but did you know going into town who you were going to do, or did you go into a town and go to the local coffee shop and start asking, or what?
That's exactly what I did, John. I would kind of look where there was little activity, where there was somebody that I could connect with, and then ask who in that town, would be good to be a representative of that area. And I think they were right. Mm-hmm. I interviewed people that just kind of set that mold of an unsung hero. And I was fortunate to be able to interview and write about him.
Mm-hmm. Well, with 617 people you interviewed, and this book, by my standards, is fairly thick. Did everybody make it to the book in some fashion?
Yes, pretty much they did, yeah. About 90% of the people that I approached were willing to undergo the interview, so I felt I was pretty fortunate. And as you can tell, my speech is not perfect, and I'm one of them, and I say a lot of you-knows and huh, yeah, maybe, and it don't make no difference type of thing, but it seemed like I was able to connect with them.
Now, you made a mention of a car and a van. How many miles did you put on your vehicles while you were doing this project?
Well, about 113,000 miles, yeah, over a period from 2004 until 2018, yeah.
Well, that was my next question. 2004 to 2018. So it took a while to gather all this. That's a lot of research. Talk about some of the experiences of going into a small town and experiencing all that. What was it like?
Oh, I loved it. I mean, it's just I had my map, and I would follow the road, and many times first experience in that town, and I just kind of felt at home because I came from a very small community, and people were open, and they were welcoming, and just kind of happy to know that somebody was interested in their town or somebody local.
Yeah. Well, what's been the reaction? Of course, the book just was out December.
Right.
So it hadn't been out long. What's been the reaction, though, so far?
It's been overwhelming. We're actually looking forward to our third printing coming up. Yeah, so we're at NDSU Bookstore. People can order the book online or locally, or else Ambrose in Fargo. And we have expanded now throughout the state in bookstores.
Who are some of the people you met maybe that stood out in the book for you?
There were a number of people. I really hate to feature someone because they were all so good. And when I left, I felt like a friend. But I cried in some of them, and I laughed in others. But with the background that I had, special people were former prisoners of war. And also those people who lost brothers or sons during active duty in war. A lady from Heil, North Dakota, had 21 children over a 21-year period. Now, people say, well, how that can be? Well, she had 2 sets of twins.
Still, that's pretty amazing.
It is. And a wonderful, wonderful lady. You could tell she would take things by a smooth handle, and very easy to visit with, and very, very remarkable. Yeah. And I'm sure a wonderful mother.
Yeah. Well, can you read a passage from your book for us? I see you got a few things earmarked.
Oh.
Have you got something special you can read us right now?
Well, I said I used to work with the former prisoners of war. I'll read a little bit from the Harold Tosted from Portland, North Dakota. He's a former prisoner of war, and he cherishes freedom. He says, for Harold, living as a POW made him realize how much he loves his country. He proudly declares, I know what freedom is because I did not have it for 27 months. When I was a prisoner of war on the other side, I know I can't imagine living in a country where you can't do what you want or please, but we are free as a bird. When I see the flag go by in a parade, it sends chills right down my body. It means so much to me. And Harold has passed away. He was a prisoner of war for over 27 months in the European theater during World War II.
Well, you've told us, and I understand you're a veteran of the Vietnam War, and of course your dedication to the book is something special. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Elmer and Lester Puppy were 2 young men, grew up on a farm a mile and a half where I was raised. And they served in World War II during during the invasion of Southern Europe, which was in July 1943. Both of them were killed in action 69 days apart. And it's interesting to me that they were serving with Audie Murphy at the time. And Audie Murphy was the most highly decorated World War II soldier. So you know they went through a lot. And they are buried at a American cemetery just outside of Rome, where there's 7,600 other American soldiers buried. And about 8 years ago, my wife and I had the opportunity to go there and visit their gravesite, and it was a very emotional time for us. Imagine walking up to a tombstone and see the name Puppy on it, that's your last name, and knowing that you are a relative. So they gave the ultimate sacrifice, and I think we need to recognize that, and also to remember all those who have previously died in service for our freedom. And I just read an excerpt from the story of Harold Tosted. Harold did not call himself a hero. The heroes were the ones that did not come back. And so he called himself a survivor. So that's just really another look at this thing of what we need to appreciate in the freedom of this country.
Absolutely, and we thank you for your service, and thank everybody for their service, especially those who gave all, so we can have those freedoms that we have.
Thank you.
Let's move on a little bit more about the book. When you're profiling a city, a bigger city like Fargo or Bismarck in your book, I noticed you chose several people. Was that just to get a flavor of the community because it's a little bigger, or what was the reasons for that?
Yeah, that was pretty much it. You know, a small town, when there's nobody living there, even though it's on the road map, I had to search out somebody who formerly lived there. And sometimes there was someone not living locally or in the nearest larger town, and it'd be out of state. So there was a couple of them I had an interview from Minnesota. But like Fargo, I just thought it would be a little unfair if we just had one person interviewed from Fargo, and so I just tried to have a little more representation from the larger cities. And once in a while we'd get into a little pinch where I had spread the word in that community that I was around looking for somebody who people respect, and so two people would come up, and I really hated to turn one down, and you know, they were both good unsung heroes, so they were both included in the book.
So with all your time, 2004 to 2018, gathering all the research for this and doing the interviews, how do you think rural North Dakota is doing? I mean, are small towns, and I know small towns struggle from time to time, but small town North Dakota, thriving, struggling? What's your opinion?
Well, of course, the smaller towns are getting smaller. The churches are consolidating. Schools are consolidating. It's, I don't know what we can do to change that. It's just the sign of the times of the, you know, of the upper Midwest. But it's the people. It's the people's mind, their wisdom, what we can learn from these people. And I think that's what's so unique about the state of North Dakota. And it was a privilege to have the opportunity to talk to people and be in a level and advise or give advice of, if any, to the future generation. And that's what the book is about.
Can you talk about, were there people in your life that helped you with this project?
Yes. First one would be my wife. I mean, I was gone quite a bit, and she would sometimes go along with me, but she was very, very supportive. And whenever I wanted to go or work on my project, she would encourage me to do it. And then I have a son, Mark, that was encouraging as well. The name of the book, Dakota Attitude, was earmarked with help from my former daughter-in-law who passed away about 3 years ago. She had cancer, and so she was really part of this. And also Chandace Johnson, who was a retired instructor at North Dakota State University. He was one of the editors, as well as Victoria, who helped me through. So I had a lot of people, a lot of encouragement, and you know, from many different people. But the problem I had, I think, is that I mentioned too earlier that you know, too early that I was going to write a book, and say, when's that book coming out? And it just, I think after a while they just quit. But I stuck with it. You know?
Yeah, they thought you were never going to get there. Can you read us one more passage from your book?
Okay, sure. This is Orville Holiday from Mountain, North Dakota. Have you ever heard of Mountain?
I have not.
Have not? Okay, that's a very strong Icelandic community. But Orville is 84 years old, retired farmer, living on a farmstead about 3 miles southwest of Mountain. Anyway, for about 5 years, Orville has been visiting patients every day at the Borg Memorial Home, a basic care facility in Mountain. He arrives around 9:30 a.m., usually stays for about an hour, often returns in the evening. I go to visit the older people. Orville has a suggestion for young people. Listen to the older people as much as you can. The patients really enjoy a visit from the younger people, especially kids. The younger people really don't know how much this visit really means to them. There just isn't enough of it. There is so much loneliness amongst the elderly. A visit from the younger generation would be appreciated and be helpful to the patient. Orville again reminds us, it works both ways. We too get a good feeling.
84 years old, he'd go visit the older people. Yeah. I found that interesting.
That's true.
Yeah, you know, Jim, you got to travel a lot and probably experienced a lot of foods. Was there anything special food-wise that you came across?
A lot of cups of coffee at the kitchen table. A lot of homemade, would you believe, bread. You know, the elderly ladies still make their bread once a week. And rhubarb desserts and homemade soups. Mm-hmm. And it was remarkable. I just they'd fill my thermos full of coffee when I left, and
I bet it
and
was.
have a sandwich ready for me, and when I was ready to go out the door.
Yeah. To you, what makes North Dakota so special?
It's the people. It's the people of our state, and I think looking back, it was very rewarding to have the opportunity and privilege to listen to these people. And they have such wonderful advice, and some of that advice is maybe so much not by their words, but their advice is how they live. And so many of them are so proud of where they were raised, where they grew up. And there's an old German saying is, home is where you were rocked in a cradle, and I definitely found that out.
Jim, we're out of time, but real quick, where can they get the book?
North Dakota State University at the bookstore there, or at Zambros in town, and most of the bookstores in North Dakota.
Okay. Jim, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Stay tuned for more. Belcourt, North Dakota author Denise Lajmadir's academic book, Stringing Rosaries, delves deep into the unsettling history of American Indian boarding schools, including stories of abuse and trauma that continues to affect many of the survivors' families yet today.
My choice for punishment was either a razor strap or a fiberglass fishing pole. He gave me a choice, so I took the fiberglass fishing pole. What happened is these kids would go and listen when they knew someone was going in room 19. They'd all gather around the corner and listen by this grill to find out how long it would take for you to start screaming your head off. So I wanted to see why you went to boarding school, what you went through at boarding school, and what your life was like now. without my voice interrupting. Just told stories, so these are all their stories in their own words. The title of my academic book is Stringing Rosaries. When I was doing my qualitative study for my dissertation, I interviewed Native American females who were the first ever females in their position of leadership. And in their stories, most of them had been boarding schooled or were talking about boarding schools or had parents that were boarding schooled. I began interviewing survivors with an interview protocol that came from the National Boarding School Healing Coalition. So many of the survivors did not want me to publish their names, but they just said, tell the world our story, tell the world what happened to us. Many, many generations of our kids were taken from homes, forcibly taken from homes, and sent to boarding schools. My father was sent to boarding school when he was 9 years old. He was taken from here, Turtle Mountain Reservation, pretty much stolen when he was 9 and sent 3 days and 3 nights on a train to Chemawa. He had never learned throughout his entire life about the government's assimilation policy, why he was stolen, why his hair was shaved off, and why he was beaten for speaking Cree and Christianity forced on him. This was his soul wound. Richard Pratt, who started the first off-reservation boarding school, Carlisle, in 1879, he liked Indians, but he hated the culture, the ceremony, the language, the traditions, so he wanted to kill the Indian and save the man. He was a military man, so they were run with military precision, along with the corporal punishment, severe beatings. My father, my mother, grandparents, they weren't allowed to speak their tribal language. If you got caught speaking your tongue, the nuns or the people in the dorm or the teachers, I guess, they would have lye soap and put that in your mouth and then hold your mouth shut until you either blew bubbles or you got blisters in your mouth. So that's how he learned how to speak English. Everything that was Indian was beaten out of them, was shamed out of them to make them as white citizens, as white as they could. So when these kids went back to home, to the reservations, I called them the returned. They didn't fit in. They didn't know their parents. Some of them were gone for up to 12 years. The suggested stay was a minimum of 4 years. So it was a very hard adjustment back. My research over the past 10 years has come up with almost 400 boarding schools in the United States, in 29 states. It's very tedious work. I would find a boarding school document, and then in there they would list other boarding schools, so then I go off and search for those boarding schools. So have I found all the boarding schools? Absolutely not. There's still people that send me boarding schools, or I'm reading on Facebook even, and someone will say, oh, my grandfather went to boarding school in Alaska, and I'll check my list and I won't have it. And then I'll Google it, and sure enough, it'll show up. The stories that you'll read in the book are of extreme loneliness. Lonesome at night, you could hear it. You could hear the little boys kind of sniffing, and they were trying not to cry loud because you got punished for that. Why am I here? Some of them were stolen, some of them were sent, some of them because their parents weren't able to function, and that's a whole other sad story there, is what was going on in reservations, reservation life, with adjusting from being people free on the prairies to being put on reservations, and then our way of living, our hunting and fishing and so on was taken away, dependent on commodity foods and so on, the illnesses and the alcoholism and the suicide. That's the legacy. It's called intergenerational trauma or historical trauma that our people are suffering now due to the boarding school era.
Well, that's all we have on Prairie Pulse this week. And as always, thanks for watching.
Funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund with money from the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4, 2008. And by the members of Prairie Public.